Well, good evening, everybody. I'm David Madison. I'm the Executive Director of the Southwestern Association of Episcopal Schools. And I'm joined this evening by our Director of Professional Development, Mary Catherine Duffy. Mary Catherine, good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
And welcome. We've got a fun webinar this evening, so thank you for taking the time to join us. Our topic tonight, 12 ways for board members to support the head of school. So before we jump in, I want to make sure that everyone understands the Q&A box. So I think towards the bottom of your screen, it may be at the top, but it should be at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a button that says Q&A. If you will punch that Q&A button, and if you will type in the city that you're joining us from, that will give us a chance to take the Q&A box for a test drive. So go ahead and type in the Q&A box the city that you are in right now, and we'll make sure the Q&A box is working for everybody. Okay, those cities are coming in. Waco, Galveston, Killeen. Welcome, welcome, everybody. So again, this month we're doing two different webinars that are going to focus on how do we support some of the most important people in our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Catherine Duffy to begin our webinar.
Well, good evening, everyone. So glad you're here. It's I agree with David. This is going to be a fun one because I think that we're always looking for opportunities to support each other in our communities. And tonight's webinar really focuses on how board members can support the head of school. I want to talk first of all, before we begin, about trust. You know, the reality is that leadership in a board, the board leadership is the most critical component. I think it sets the tone for how the school runs, and board leadership is critical to a healthy school. And obviously in leadership, there are no more important words than trust. Building trust between the board and the head of school is a critical component to success throughout the whole community. The goal of my webinar today is to talk about some ways that we can tangibly build that trust, maybe even talk about some things that might create issues of distrust, and to just really focus on ways that we create that trust between the board and the head of school. So let's just kind of go to the next slide, and let's just kind of talk a little bit about kind of my experience as a head of school. I really believe, I've said this before, that the being a head of school is one of the hardest things I ever did. It is a very complex job. It is stressful. It is challenging. It has a ton of moving parts. And so how we go about supporting the head of school really is, I think, a critical piece of the future of the school. One of the things, I was talking to somebody last night about that job, and one of the things that I said was that we as a board and as a community, we want good, positive, competent people to run our schools, but the very nature of a school can create such a stressful environment that we can't keep them, because we have so many moving parts, and there are so many things that the head of school has to do. And so we have to take seriously as a board, what does it look like to offer support and encouragement and build trust with that leader. And so let's just jump right in and talk about what I believe is maybe the most, this is the first way to do it, but maybe the most important way. And that is that board members need to understand their role on the board. We've talked a lot about board roles and responsibilities, about what the role is of the board, but those basically fall into three main categories. Strategically, we're strategic, we're fiduciary, and we're generative. And let's talk about those for just a minute to make sure that you understand the roles. So strategic just means basically that you see the big picture, that you are planning strategically for where the school is going, that we're making decisions that are big picture decisions, that we're preparing for those kinds of things. The second is the fiduciary role, and that's just the financial oversight, considering the financial ramifications of decisions, looking at the budget, making sure that we're watching the financials of the school and the assets, and making sure that we're making good financial decisions. And then finally, the generative piece, which is the idea that you are playing the long game. So board members have roles in the community, and those roles are strategic, they're fiduciary, and they're generative. So what are they not? Well, they're not, the roles of the board is not to get in the weeds. One of the things that we talk about a lot is the idea around the issues of management versus the issues of governance. And the reality is that our boards are populated oftentimes with people who are not only on the board because they love the school, but they're parents. And when you are a parent on the board, that comes with some unique challenges, I think, in terms of how you have are given the opportunity to get in the weeds on things that really it's not your role. So, for example, you know, parents who are attending birthday parties or cocktail parties, and someone comes up and says, "Hey, I want to talk to you because I know you're a board member because you are. We've got a lot of homework in 4th grade, and that's a real issue, and I'd like to talk to you about it." Well, when we talk about refusing to triangulate the head of school, what that means is that we as board members understand that that's not our role to determine homework. It's not, that's an issue of management. And so you've got a couple of choices in that situation. You can go, "Oh gosh, tell me more about that." And then you're in the weeds. Or you can say, "Hey, we're a strategic board. That's not our role. I really encourage you to talk to the head of school." When you do that, then you're supporting the head of school immensely by sending issues of management their way. Now, one way that we would consider helping a board member in that situation is that the board should have a strong school governance, a school grievance policy. And David wrote and I think it was in your notes from just a couple of weeks ago,
It
where
was
he
a
talked
blog,
about
blog entry, I
a
believe.
blog. Yeah, where he talked about what does that look like. And every board member does run into that. We see that all the time where board members are feeling like they need to get into an issue that maybe they're not supposed to get into. And so one of the things he talked about was the idea around making sure you understand the difference between an issue of management and an issue of governance, and then making sure that you have a strong policy on grievance. What does a parent do when they have an issue with the way the school is running? Boards need to remember, and these are David's words, boards need to remember that they are not the court of last resort for administrative decisions that might be unpopular. In those instances, having a strong grievance policy can really help. And you can really, that's where you really support the head of school in offering them the opportunity to address those issues of management in the way that they see fit. Now, that of course there's got to be something in place if the issue has to do with head of school misconduct or anything like that. That's where the grievance policy being strong is really going to help. David, did you want to touch base on that?
Well, and it's a little bit of a push me pull you. It's a little difficult, but what I'm encouraging schools to do is craft their grievance policies or their complaint policies such that it's very clear that the board is not the arbiter if someone disagrees with an administrative decision that the head has made. When it comes to operational decisions, the head's decision is final, full stop, the end. Now, that's not to say the board won't have the opportunity to share in the head of school evaluation if they feel as if certain decisions are being made inappropriately or improperly, or if the head needs to hear some feedback. But what the board's not the appellate court necessarily, especially for a lot of matters that are honestly operational. Heads of schools on a daily basis have to make decisions that are sometimes unpopular. And I think as a board, it's important for us to navigate how do we respond when this is just an unpopular decision versus how do we respond that in a way that really may be a need for feedback, if that makes sense, to the CEO of the
Right.
school, the head. And so I would just encourage boards to start having that conversation. When do we get involved? What are the matters where we may get involved, and what are the matters where we say, you know what, this was the head of school's decision. I'm sorry, this was an unpopular decision, but it was the head of school's decision. That's final. So the purpose
Yeah.
of that blog was just to really try to spark some conversation at the board level, so the boards can have those conversations now, as opposed to trying to navigate that in the heat of the the open letter to the board from an upset parent, for example.
Yeah. And that really, I mean, honestly, that's why I wanted this to be first, because that really is maybe the number one way that you can support head of school.
And one
So
way to
let's
look
just,
at that is determine, whatever we're talking about, is this a fiduciary issue? Is it a strategic issue? Or is it a governance issue?
correct.
If it's an unpopular decision that you can't figure out a fiduciary, a strategic, or a generative impact, then it may just be an unpopular administrative decision, and the board's going to support the head, and that's the end of it. So,
Yeah. Right. So let's go to the second one. The second one is to come to board meetings prepared and ready to engage. I really think that it's important for board members. I think sometimes again, everybody's busy, and it's hard to, especially when we have high performing boards where people are on a number of board meetings and they have a lot of stuff going on. But the reality is that it is critical for the head of school to have engaged board members, people who actually come on the regular basis. They're prepared and they're ready to ask questions. I used to get a little frustrated with, I would work so hard on preparing the board packet and working with the board chair. We'd get it out early, and then people would come to the board meetings and go, oh, I don't have a packet. I haven't had a chance to look at it. And we send that stuff out. Most of the heads I know send that stuff out a week in advance. And so the idea that you would come to the board meeting and you're ready to ask questions. And of course, again, we're talking about issues of governance. We're not talking about that you come to the board meeting and ask questions about why we had a free uniform pass day on Friday. This is when there are big decisions on the table, like tuition increases or benefits packages for faculty, compensation, that sort of thing, that you're asking those questions. Being engaged for me is also about not rubber stamping things, asking the question. I really valued my board members who pushed back on my ideas, who expected me to show hard and soft data that allowed for them to be able to make good decisions. I think that's really a gift that you can give, because I found on the times that I did not have people asking questions and they just sort of rubber stamped ideas that I had. Number one, if it was not a good idea, then I was usually the one left holding the bag with no board support. And number two, it can create a feeling that the board isn't engaged and that the head of school makes all the decisions. And I don't think that's number one, it's not healthy. And number two, it's not helpful to the head of school. So I really encourage you to come to board meetings prepared and ready to be engaged. So the third way is to be willing to serve on a board committee. SAES best practice is that we have committees on our boards that those are working committees. And if you do not have a board committee, you should just definitely check your bylaws, but there should be standing committees. A lot of times we'll have ad hoc committees depending on what we're doing. If you should get on committees in which your gifts will be the best served. The board needs, finance people on the finance committee. And if you're good at marketing, you can be on the marketing committee. If you are, on the years that we had accreditation visits, we would have really specific people on those committees. If there's going to be a strategic plan, people who were maybe like on my accreditation committee, I almost always had people who would be good editors for the self-study. Think about the gifts that you have when you get on the board, and look at the committees and ask the question, where can I best use my gifts to the benefit of the board and the school? So the next way is, and this is a really important, to me, this is maybe one of the most important things you can do, and that is to take your confidentiality pledge seriously. Hopefully, as a board, you each year are signing a confidentiality agreement, kind of a covenant in which you understand your roles and responsibilities, and part of that should be a confidentiality pledge. I can't stress enough how easily trust can be broken when there's a confidentiality breach from the board. I've talked about this several times, how critical the board trust was for me, because I needed to be able to come to board meetings with my ideas. I needed to be able to come and say, hey, I'm thinking about this, and to get that feedback. But if I couldn't do that, and I remember just one in particular situation where I had an idea that I wanted to present to, I just wanted their thoughts. I wanted, kind of put your parent hat on, tell me how you see this as a parent. And before I even, that was on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night. And before I even got to school the next day, I had a mad teacher who said, why are you changing things and not talking to me? And a board member had called the teacher and said, hey, this is what we're doing. And oh my gosh, it was the fallout from that was, for me, was weeks.
Yeah.
And it was
trying to put that back together.
Yeah. And then I had, so not only was the trust breached between me and the board, there was now trust issues with me and one of my employees that I had to kind of work through. So I think that is really important for every board member to know that the best way you can support that head is to be confidential, to take that seriously. When we talk about acting as a trusted advisor to the head, I think heads really need, I don't know how you see this, David, but I think heads really definitely need to be able to ask the board questions and throw ideas out and get their thoughts.
Absolutely. I mean, here's the situation, gang. The work of running an Episcopal school, be it as the head of school or be it as a board member, the work of leading an Episcopal school is getting exponentially more difficult. It just is. There's more competition. There's more challenges. We're having to be innovative. We're having to come up with, new approaches in a whole variety of different things. So for that creative work to happen, we've got to be able to have conversations at the board level where we're going to explore many different options. Let me tell you, we're going to come up with some really bad ideas.
Right.
I mean, we're going to generate, when we're coming up with different possible solutions to new challenges that we had no idea were going to show up, we're going to come up with some horrible ideas. The board space is where we can generate those ideas freely and then have the conversation of, oh, wow, okay, that's going to be a really bad idea, and here's why. There's no way to have that kind of conversation if, as a head, you're concerned about, oh my gosh, is any of this going to get out?
Right.
There's just no way to do that. So one of the gifts as a board member you can give is by helping to create that creative space where we can exchange ideas in a safe area without the community finding out about something before we vet it. We're going to come up with ideas that we're going to decide, oh my gosh, that would be a horrible, horrible approach. And you can't have those conversations if people are concerned about information getting out of those discussions. So it's critically important.
I agree. Okay, the next one is be willing to have clear, honest conversations with the head. This kind of, for me, revolves around, if you have a concern about something, and I would always, and I say this to my board all the time, come talk to me, tell me what you're thinking, tell me what you're hearing. I value, this kind of goes back to the confidentiality piece as well, but I really valued when my board members gave me a heads up about an issue that was brewing, because it was hard for me a lot, especially after my kids left the school. It was hard for me. I didn't know what was happening in the preschool area when I didn't have kids there anymore. And so I valued my board being willing to talk to me about things that they were hearing or concerns that they had. Now, again, I also valued when my board members would have, if they had a concern, personal concern, that they came and talked to me about it, modeling what we're asking other parents to do, which is to come and talk to me about an issue. However, I think it's really important that if you're not sure, if you're coming as a board member, if you have an issue as a board member, and if you're not sure if it's an issue of governance or it's an issue of something else, that you talk to the board chair, ask the question, hey, this is the concern I have. I thought I'd go talk to the head about that. Is this something that is in our lane? Because I think boards need to continually ask the question, are we in our lane? You know, Brene Brown talks about being clear. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. I love that, because I really I would much rather you come and talk to me in my office than talk about me at a cocktail party. And I think that that does happen on a, I don't know how often, but I hear it a lot, that board members are engaging in conversations with parents at parties or at birthday parties or whatever. And, you know, I think they unknowingly think that, well, I'm just having a conversation with a peer. But as a board member, if you're sitting in a group listening to a kind of a complaint session and you're talking about it as well, then you're having honest conversations with parents and not with the head. And so I think that having those honest conversations with the head, having the head's back, being willing to tell the head what's going on, I think that's important. I think that, and I liked that. That was important to me. Okay, so we have a poll question here. And we're going to talk about board chair and head of school, but I want to know, does your board chair and head of school meet regularly? And if so, how often? So we want to get you to vote on that. Tell us how often your board chair and your head of school meet.
And the range is from not regularly at all to the other extreme, which is
Right.
hourly.
Yes, hopefully it's not hourly.
And everything in between. So I've got that poll question open. So click on the best response that represents how often the board chair and the head of school meets. And while we're waiting for those responses, I also want to remind everybody, don't hesitate to use the Q&A box if you want to ask us a question, or if there's something you want to push back on, or if you want some examples or clarification, use that Q&A box to communicate to us. Feel free. We'll leave the question open for a little bit more, another 5 seconds. Okay, let's see what the results are. So look at that.
Okay,
So
not regularly. Okay.
Yeah, a
Once a
little
month.
bit over a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
We've got everything from not regularly, so that's something that obviously we want to kind of peel that back a little bit and kind of talk about what that's all about, and maybe look at some strategies on trying to get a little more communication once a month, a couple times a month, weekly. So I think, MK, you can tell me what you think. I think normally, what do we hear? We hear weekly or maybe every other week, I think, is the normal for what, I mean, not that there's a normal, but that's what I seem to hear. When you were in school, were you weekly, every other week?
So go to the next slide. I would argue that at least monthly would be the best choice. Some people are going to want to meet on a more often basis. I don't know anybody meeting hourly or daily unless there's a real issue.
I mean, there certainly can be some situations where hourly or daily is appropriate if you're managing some different issues or
crisis or whatever.
Yeah, you know, one thing that's going on right now is a lot of anxiety about coronavirus.
Yes,
and
exactly.
How that can affect, you know, trips or potential school closures, those things. So we're in a time right now where, it could be a little more frequent than normal, but if everything is going relatively smoothly, I think every other week, monthly, something along those lines is probably what we see.
Are y'all there? Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
I think we lost
Okay,
you for a minute.
sorry.
I think you're back.
Sorry. Sorry. My
We were
internet is
just talking.
unstable.
We
I'm
were
not
just
sure
talking
that it's
about
not
the.
me. Yeah.
You know, it's a problem when Zoom tells you the presenter is
When
unstable.
somebody tells me I'm unstable, that's right. No, what I was saying is that when I had a board chair that was a parent, oftentimes we would just touch base a couple of times a week, but have a formal meeting once a month and to plan
Yeah.
agenda. And if we needed to have another one, we would. When it was a person that was off campus, a person that wasn't on campus on the regular, we did for sure a monthly meeting. So I would recommend at least a monthly, and if not, a couple of times a month.
So let me
So
ask a question. So we had, you know, some people responded not regularly at all.
I
So
think you need to meet, I think that needs to be, there should be regularly scheduled meetings with the board chair and the head of school. The head of school needs that. And sometimes I think the board chairs think, well, the head of school is doing great and I'm busy and I don't, but the reality is that even if the head of school says, no, I don't think we need to meet, for me, it's important that the board chair makes that a priority and says, no, we're going to meet once a month and for sure, and we're going to plan the agenda together, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide, and we're going to talk about what's going on with you.
yeah,
That is a critical way to do that, and it needs to happen.
use the Q&A box if there's some other follow-up questions related to that.
Right. So that speaks to the next slide, which is that the board chair should be fully aware of the big issues that the head of school is facing. Not that I ever looked like this, but I feel like I probably look like this on the regular. I think it's really critical in this, you know, it's not just about planning the agenda, but the board chair needs to know about big issues that the head of school is facing. Even if the full board doesn't know it, the board chair's role is a critical one in terms of support. Oftentimes the head of school has no one to talk to about the things that they're worried about. You know, speaking of coronavirus, we have, you know, if I'm in that situation, I'm going to want to talk about my concerns with the board chair that I may not be presenting, because I have to act like, you know, when there's a crisis or when there's something really serious we're dealing with, we have to look like we know what we're doing and that we're on it. And it's nice to have the idea that you can talk about your big issues with the board chair, to know who are, you know, I've got a big parent meeting today and they're very upset, or I've got this, you know, this teacher that I'm really trying to work through and I may have to dismiss a teacher. Those are big issues, and the board chair can really support the head of school in that manner. So let's go on to the next one, and we got another poll question. Speaking of support, does your board have a committee for head support and evaluation? So we want to know if you do have a head support and evaluation committee. If you do not, we're going to talk about why, if you don't, why that's important.
So the question is open. Does your board have a head support and evaluation committee? Yes or no? While you're responding, if you're answering no to that, I'll put a plug in for our webinar on goal setting. We talk a little bit about creating a head support and evaluation committee if you don't have one in that webinar. I don't have the date in front of me, but it's on I believe it's next month, and it's on our webinar page on the website. So we'll leave this question open for another 5 seconds. And last call for votes. Let's take a look.
Okay, so we have 1 that does and 3 that do not. So that gives us good information. So let's go to the next slide where I believe one of the very best ways you can support your head of school is through the creation of a head support and evaluation committee. This committee is such a critical committee. It's a subcommittee of the board. It executes on behalf of the board. It has a couple of roles. The first role is that it helps create the goals and the things that the head of school is going to be evaluated on. So it works with the head of school to create those goals, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But it also acts as a committee where the head of school can come and talk and vent and figure out what are the things that we need to be doing. In some schools, in my school, this was the executive committee that served in that capacity. In some bigger schools where there's maybe a bigger board, there may be an ad hoc committee that's a separate
And
committee.
Mary
Did you
Catherine,
have?
one of our participants chimed in and said that, yeah, in their school, the executive council served in that function. I see that a
Right.
lot, and I don't know if that, I wouldn't say that's, the wrong way to do it. The one thing I would suggest is sometimes people are selected to serve as officers on the board because they bring a certain skill set. That
Right.
skill set may or may not be the identical skill set needed to serve on a head support and evaluation committee.
I think that's right.
So yeah, so while the only question I would pose is whether or not the head support and evaluation committee is a nuanced group that you may want to bring in one or two voices that are really, really good at this work that may not be the ideal person to be the treasurer, for example,
Right.
or to
Yeah.
be, to be the officer, for example. So I don't think there's anything wrong with giving that task to the executive committee. The only thing I would ask is when you really pull back the purpose of the executive committee and when you really explore what a high-flying head support and evaluation committee could be, sometimes those are the same people and sometimes they're not.
I agree. And it's critical when this committee is being put together. There's a few things that you need to think about. First of all, it needs to be people who can be fair and balanced in their work. I like that. Guard against special interest, respect confidentiality, honor appropriate boundaries. And there needs to be input from the head of school. The head of school needs to have some input in who's on that committee. They don't get to make all the choice, but they certainly, what people on the board do you feel like would be people that would be really helpful to the head of school? So
Or
in
sometimes
that
it's,
committee,
sometimes one person on that committee may not be a board member. So one thing I've
yeah,
seen in the creation of a head support and evaluation committee is giving the current head the opportunity to select one person, and sometimes they select a former head who may not
yes,
be serving on the board but would bring a certain type of expertise to the conversation. And so that's an example of that person may not be a member of the executive committee, but could be a really valuable resource on a head support and evaluation committee.
yeah, I agree with that. So then let's talk about the next slide, which is the creation of a strong evaluation instrument. Okay, so the head support and evaluation committee would also, or can also, work with the board and creating a strong evaluation committee, instrument, that is tied to goals. And so when we talk about the head support and evaluation committee helping to set goals for the head, these goals are what the evaluation is going to be tied to. And the goals should be mutually agreed upon by the head of school and the head support and evaluation committee. Now, there's a lot of times people ask me, well, who sets those goals? I think everybody sets the goals. The goals may be that the board, from a board evaluation standpoint, the full board had some input and said, hey, these are some themes that came out of the last evaluation, and we pull some goals from there. I used to almost always do a self-evaluation at the end of my school year and look at the goals that I had for myself. I'm kind of a goal setter by nature. So I would bring goals to the table. There would be goals that maybe my board chair said, hey, this is an area that maybe not even anybody realizes. I had a board chair that was just really strong, and she and I had a great relationship, and she brought up a couple of goals that she said, I'd really like to see you do this differently next year, or add this to your goals. So I think all of yes, all of the above, where everybody kind of has some input and then everyone agrees upon it. And then the evaluation instrument is tied to that. The goals should be smart. They should be achievable. They should have a time limit. They should be, things that you can actually do, rather than just kind of lofty things that people aren't able to accomplish. The next way that we talk about supporting the head of school is to budget, for the head of school to have professional development opportunities. I looked for a picture. I just want to tell y'all that I did look for a picture that would, for some reason, this does feel like a head of school that's trying to learn more and maybe is feeling a little bit overwhelmed. But the reality is that our heads of schools need to have professional development just as much as everybody else in the school. And I think, and I was guilty of this myself, that oftentimes this particular thing gets set aside, whether it's the head of school that's looking at the budget and going, hey, we don't really have any extra money, so I won't do that. I won't, or we need to put our PD into curriculum planning and all of this other stuff. But the reality is that the head of school needs to have professional development, and it's unique. So head of school professional development isn't usually tied to let's go and learn about the new math curriculum. It's got to be more leadership training. It's got to be professional development in the way of, maybe I went to some professional development on faculty evaluation. How do I do a better job of evaluating my faculty? I went to some professional development around legal issues. These are the kinds of things that the head of school really needs to do. And so I think that an important way to support the head of school is to budget and ensure that that budget includes specifically for the head of school, and not necessarily, in my opinion, it shouldn't necessarily just be in the PD section. I think it should be set aside and should be clear. And that way the head of school knows, hey, we not only are going to give you the money to do it, we expect you to do it. So the next way that you can support your head of school is, I think, unique, to encourage the head of school to take their vacation days. This is an area, I don't know about you, David, but I really struggled to do this. I did. Partially because I knew that in the summer I had lots of people weren't driving me crazy. I wouldn't is interrupted, and I could get a ton done. And so I would spend a lot of time at school in the summer. Sometimes, and honestly, truthfully, later when my kids were older and kind of on their own, I would almost work more in the summer, longer hours, because I was getting stuff done. And then all of a sudden I'd wake up in August and I hadn't taken any vacation.
Yeah,
And so
summers are getting increasingly busy on school campuses, particularly the proliferation of more in-depth summer programs that sometimes
yes,
fall in the program that the head of school is having to oversee. Summers are more and more not the downtime that they used to be.
right.
So I
Right.
think that, yeah, I mean, whatever the negotiated number of vacation days may be, they're there for a reason. And I think we're getting to a point now where it's almost dangerous if you're not protecting some time in the summer, because otherwise you just don't have any time to recharge. My experience as I work with more heads of school is that the summertime is no longer a time where things slow down.
Right. And the reality is that most of our school heads are high achievers. They are they're go-getters. They want to do well. They want their school to be successful. The other thing is in the summer, I don't know about other schools, but we were touring people all summer long, and every single tour that I missed because I'm on vacation is a kid I didn't get. And so I think there are ways that the board not only can offer support in this area, but the executive committee or the head support and evaluation committee needs to just to say, you need to take your vacation days, and
Yeah.
how can we help you create a system or a process in the office so that you can be gone and that stuff can still take place.
The
And
head
so
of school,
that's a great way to do it.
yeah, the head of school obviously is responsible for her or his health.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a shared responsibility at some level with the board. What I mean by that is, I think, frankly, it's the board's responsibility to sometimes hold a mirror up to the head
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
tell the head, hey, you're not taking your time, you're not taking care of yourself. That needs to be a priority, and you need to hear that is a priority for us as well as the
Right.
governing board of this body. I really think that's the board's responsibility. And as busy executive director, and you were a busy head of school, we need to hear that from our boards, I think.
It's almost
Um,
like a permission. It's almost
I
like
think
you
so.
hear, you hear from your board, hey, um, we care enough about you to tell you that these are here so that you are fresh and ready to go. I had a board chair who put her foot down and said, do not come back. I do not want to see you for 2 weeks. I will drive by the school and find out if you're there. And that really did help me take some time off and feel confident that I was going to get that recharge. And so I agree with you. There's a place for boards here. And then let's go to the last slide. I think is as much as anything, you know, we're Christians. We're Christian schools. We're faith-filled people, and I think as a board, that you can offer so much, but praying for the head of school is so critical. I love this part of what we get to do in our boards and in our schools, that we get to pray and we get to read the scripture and but praying for our leadership and praying for each other. As I said before, and I'll say it again and again, this job is very difficult, and it's getting more difficult by the day, and it's stressful and it's lonely, and just knowing that your board cares enough about you and is praying for you, that's, for me, that was huge.
I'm going to go one step further and say something that is horribly non-Episcopalian, because we tend to get a little uncomfortable talking about this, but I would say pray for the head of school without ceasing, but then tell the head of school that you're praying for her or him.
Yes.
They need to hear that. I mean, obviously you need to pray for them, but there's something that's particularly powerful. And as a priest, you know, when people come and tell me that they pray for me, there's something particularly powerful about that. So I would say absolutely pray for the head of school, but maybe step out of your comfort zone a little bit and tell them, you know, hey, I just want you to know I'm praying for you. I know this is a tough situation. I know this is, you know, I know this is a challenging job, but we've got your back, and not just in the boardroom, but we're also, you know, we're offering prayers on your behalf too. So I would encourage you, particularly if you're not someone who really, you know, it's okay to say that. It's okay to tell the head of school that you're praying for her or him, and I would dare say it would be appreciated. So I just throw that out there as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I keep thinking about, as we talk about this idea of difficult situations or difficult decisions that the board sees the head make, that does make all the difference. When you hear your board say to you, hey, we think you're doing a great job, we want you to take the time off, we're praying for you, those are just as important as anything else you do. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted this to be the last slide. So let's review real quickly on the 12 ways that you can support your head of school: understanding your role on the board, come to meetings prepared and engaged, being willing to serve on a committee, practicing confidentiality, expressing your concerns directly to the head of school, meeting regularly between the board chair and the head of school, board chair being aware of big issues faced by the head of school, the board that's creating a head support and evaluation committee, and that the board is creating a strong evaluation instrument and actually conducting the evaluation, the board that budgets for head of school professional development, encouraging the head of school to take vacation, and then praying without ceasing. So I guess at this time we can open up for questions. Anything anybody has to offer, anything you want to throw out there that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll leave that summary slide up for a little bit just so you can see all 12 of those ideas. I think those are all great suggestions, Mary Catherine. So thank you for working on that and pulling these ideas together. But we'll just be around. We're gonna be around for a few more minutes if there's any questions that you have or any other comments, or if you'd like to discuss any of these points further.
We do want to throw out a shameless plug for tomorrow, our heads of schools. If any of you are head of school or know about heads of schools that are, we're going to be doing a webinar on how to support your faculty tomorrow at 10 a.m. And that's going to be a good one as well. Lots of support needed around here.
February can be a tough month in our schools, and so we really wanted to use our 2 webinars this month to focus on support. So tonight, how the board chair can support and the board members can support the head. And tomorrow we're going to shift gears and talk about how heads can support their faculty. We got a bit of fan mail, which is always fun. You Too Rock signed a friend from Galveston.
Aw,
Thank you, friend
thank
from
you, Pat.
Galveston. Thank you. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we'll stay online for a few more minutes. I see some questions are popping in, so I'm going to stop the recording, and then we will have a little more discussion.